Welcome back to another episode of Fret Buzz the podcast. My name is Aaron Sefcik.
And I'm Joe McMurray.
And today we have a special guest, Steve Vai. He's done tons and tons of interviews with famous musicians over the years. He's been in the business for 30 plus years doing radio. He's got a wonderful show called Chop Shop Radio. He's got a book out. We're so glad to have you, Steve. Thank you for joining us here at Fret Buzz.
Yeah, for sure. You can't have a guitar show and then decline an offer from Fret Buzz. I mean, that's just kind of works hand in hand.
Right. Awesome. Well, yeah, let's jump right in. So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, and I guess my first question would be, it started way back in, I guess, 1989 with Sabotage.
Yeah, I suppose it really did. That was, I recall being at a radio station and them asking, hey, would you interview this band? And I didn't really even know them at the time.
Right.
And CD players were just coming out. Some of my friends had them, but I didn't have one yet. But I went out and I bought the CD. The station, of course, had one. And that's when I first listened to the band. And that's when I did my very first interview. Back in 1989 with Chris and John. Of course, Chris Oliva is no longer with us, but John and Chris are still around and in a band called the Trans Siberian Orchestra.
That's awesome. TSO, man. Love that. They're
yeah,
cool.
And I still stay in touch with those guys to this day, 30 years ago. I still, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that is
great. And by the way, the interview was awful. Oh my God. They could tell that I didn't know what I was doing, my first interview, so they saved it. I let them do all the talking.
Yeah, right.
So you went and really studied, like you listened to the album, and did you go in with stuff prepared to ask them about?
One of the things I think made me a little bit different than other radio hosts was I never really wrote down questions. My research was listen to the music.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, back then there wasn't really access to the internet anyway. I mean, maybe if you had, what was the first one, Netscape or,
right.
Whatever they had back then, you might be able to get on a website or two about cooking maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't, I was never that guy who cared who your girlfriend was. I just wanted to listen to the music and ask questions about the music and how it was created.
How did you get into radio in the first place?
Well, that's I guess we've got plenty of time, so I'll give you the kind of the fun version of the story.
Yeah.
I had gone to school to be an audio engineer.
Okay.
So I actually was a certified audio engineer and started doing just little things here and there in recording studios, wherever I could, just to, internships, cut your teeth, all that kind of stuff. And somebody called me and said, hey, I know you know some stuff about audio. We're doing a television show and we're filming an orchestra. And how do I make an orchestra sound good with two mics?
Oh my! Wow.
Of course you can't.
Right.
So the answer was you can't.
Right.
So I borrowed a bunch of gear, whatever I had and friends had, and I went and I mic'd as much of the orchestra as I could, and I helped them with their TV show. Wow. In exchange, they said, how about we teach you about television since you're teaching us about sound? So I started doing camera operation. And there was this really cranky old man who had a political talk show. And his name was Ted Johnson. And he was not necessarily mean-spirited, but just not the nicest guy in the world.
Right.
And so nobody wanted to work a show but me.
Right.
And one day he said something along the lines of, why do you put up with me? And I said, well, what are you going to do? Fire me? I work for free.
Right.
Yeah.
And it blew his mind. He's like, you don't get paid? I'm like, no. He said, what do you think about radio? I said, love radio. He said, I'm the general manager at a radio station called Z-Rock. Why don't you come in tomorrow? I'll give you a tour of the radio station.
Wow.
So I went in, I said, it's Mr. Johnson here. And they took me into his office and he goes, by the way, before I take you around and show you the radio station, I want you to sign that piece of paper because anybody who will put up with me for free works for me. And that was it. I've worked in radio pretty much ever since.
That's awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
You sacrificed for a little bit and it really paid off.
I didn't know, any better. I mean, really, I was just hungry for knowledge, whether that be TV, radio, production, recording studio. I just wanted to know how everything worked.
Right. Yeah. You just want to get your hands on it and in it and be able to do it every day. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really the key to being successful at just about anything, to be in it because you really, really care about actually how it works, not like because you want to get famous or make money. You wanted to know how it all worked. That's great.
Yeah. And it's a discussion that comes up often in our interviews, especially with people who do more than one thing. But when you get into the whole circle of art, whether you're writing a book or taking a photograph, painting, presenting a radio show, whatever it is, the thing that connects with humans the easiest is the truth. And so when you're willing to just go out there and be honest with people, maybe you don't know something, but that's okay. We don't all know everything.
Right.
So when you're honest, it usually connects with people.
Yeah.
And so that's been sort of my approach.
So where did you go from, you're working at the radio station, and how did he immediately set you up as a host personality, or were you running the board?
Yeah, I was running the board and doing production since I was familiar with the engineering part. Making commercials, recording is where I started. And actually my first air shift, it was kind of funny, was because of a blizzard. The next person couldn't get into work.
Oh, nice.
I mean, just
how'd you get to work?
Everywhere. I was already there. I got there before the blizzard, and I was working, and I was thinking, like, well, I can't go home in this. I'm just going to sleep on the couch. Like, this is crazy.
Right. And
then I got the call, like, hey, the next person can't come in. And I think this kind of a funny story. The guy says, have you ever been on the air before? And I said, no. He said, all right, well, tonight's the night, so go for it. And the program director called me back about an hour and a half later and goes, you sound great. I thought you said you'd never done this before. I said, oh, no. I said, I've never been on the air before. I've been doing this since I was 3 years old in my bedroom. Like, I've been doing it my whole life. Right. Just nobody ever heard it before.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was it. And, the word he used was a natural. He said, I think you're a natural. And instead of, sort of hiding you away in the production room, let's work on this and let's, move you towards being on the air.
Wow. That's great. What a great opportunity.
Yeah.
Is it, what is it that makes you natural? Is it your ability to speak, like not do what I'm doing right now, to be able to say what's on your mind fluidly and, to be entertaining about it at the same time? What are the qualities that make a good radio host or radio personality?
Well, they're like everything else, there's not just one way to do something. There's a bunch of different ways. One of my early best friends in radio would write out every single thing he was going to say. He would write it all out and have it in front of him. And I would write out nothing. It was more of an improvisation based on, all the time I'd spent listening to music or whoever I'd been talking to or whatever I'd been doing. But when you listened, if you didn't know, if you weren't in the room, you couldn't tell the difference between the two of us. You'd had no idea that one person was reading and the other one wasn't. So how you prepare and how you deliver, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. The key to me, again, which goes back to art, is just be yourself. Like when I was 6, 7, 8, 15, 16, I would just bring people over the house and just share music with them because I loved it. Oh my God, you have to hear this band. Nobody else has heard this band. And I'm still the same way, except now, dear God, I'm over 50. So
that's all right, man. You still got that passion. That's what lit the fire in the first place. That's great. Great.
It's helpful to hear about this because I haven't been on air except for on this podcast, really. And so I'm used to being on stage performing. I'm more of a musician and less of a radio host, but I've been learning that it's similar to being on stage. It's just a completely different stage. And it's a learning experience. We listen back to old episodes and I hear things that I did, even just little things like hearing myself say, right. In the middle, responding to people. Some things you just learn on air, you just don't do.
Yeah.
But and a lot of that is listening back to yourself. Just like anything else, it takes some degree of practice, whether you have a natural, what's the word that people, aptitude. Like you may have a natural aptitude for something, but if you don't practice it, it's not going anywhere.
Right.
So, it's about that.
And I think some of that plays into being on stage as well. You have to be able to kind of carry the audience along with you and kind of bring them into your circle and get that personal feel between you and the audience on stage as well. Whether you're doing it at a small gig or on a huge stadium, you kind of have to, I mean, obviously on a huge stadium, it's a little bit harder because, you know, you don't get that personal connection as much, but you still have to go about doing that.
Which is funny because I feel far more comfortable being on a big stage. Like I just did every year I do a charity introduction for Trans Siberian Orchestra. So I'm up on stage in front of 17, 18,000.
Yeah.
I'm more comfortable there than I am being at the local club in front of 8. I just, yeah. I don't know why, because it becomes the mass becomes one thing, right, as opposed to a bunch of individuals.
Right.
Just the way it is.
Yeah.
And here's an interesting, this is more on the science side, but this is kind of an interesting thing. You know how certain people who have a stutter can sing with no stutter, right, because it's a different part of the brain? I have dyslexia, not horrible, it's mild, but I have it. And it's especially bad with numbers. Mm-hmm. But if I'm presenting, if I'm on the air and I'm presenting, it goes away. It's a different part of the brain because it's a performance of some nature. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it kind of connects with what we were talking about. We had a bass player on and we were getting into talking about how music has healing properties, because I play at retirement homes and for folks with memory loss and memory disorders. And it really does make them, they can go from looking like they're staring off into space to they all of a sudden they come alive and they start singing the words and their eyes light up. It's really amazing what it can do. Performance, music, or, you know, whatever you perform.
Yeah. I'm not sure who said it first, but I've said it many times since. Music is the language of the soul. If the soul could speak a language, its language is music.
Yep. I've always said music is a universal language. We all speak it.
Yeah. And the other universal language, this I love. A note sounds the same in every language. You know what else does? Laughter.
Oh yeah.
It matters not where you're from. Laughter sounds exactly the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
All right. So, okay. Yeah. So coming out of the radio station and how long it's so, okay. Let me take a step back. You're based out of Detroit?
Yeah.
Okay. So we got a snowstorm and you're doing radio there. Where did it go from there?
My first on air was in Flint, Michigan, which is closer to where I actually grew up.
Okay.
After that, the station, went dark. The owner couldn't make any money and it disappeared. And, a bunch of odd jobs, working overnight. There was a very short stint actually working undercover for the police, which was really weird. I mean, just there were some strange moments going on. But
got to do what you got to do, man.
Yes. So another station opened up in Detroit that was the same format, same delivery as the station in Flint. And so I went down and I interviewed for it. And I don't know where the brashness came from because I'm not that guy today, but I remember telling the program director during the interview, basically, I know more about this stuff than you do, so you need to hire me. Which I thought I'd never hear from him again, and I didn't hear from him for 3 or 4 weeks. But when he called, he said, by the way, that sat with me, and I realized you know more about this than I do. I need you. And because he was a jazz guy. I mean, he knew and understood programming. Right. He just didn't know and understand rock and roll, which is where I was from.
Right.
So that brought me down to Detroit. And I've been in this market pretty much ever since. I mean, just a ton of different stops, a handful of different stations, but all pretty much in Detroit now.
Okay. Wow.
I'll have to ask my family if they hear you on the radio, because my mom's side of the family is all from Detroit. I was just up there a few weeks ago.
Make sure if they're tuning in for the first time that it's be prepared if they tune in the morning, because Dave and Chuck the Freak might frighten them.
Okay, I'll give them a warning. I don't think my cousins would care.
Yeah, might freak out your mom a little bit.
It already sounds interesting. Oh my gosh! All right.
How was the blizzard, or not the blizzard, the freezing cold this week?
I wouldn't know.
Minus 30.
I was on a ship in Mexico. The Chop Shop is a media partner with Shiprocked. So every year we go on a music cruise, and it's my job to interview a bunch of musicians and take photos of the bands and all that kind of stuff. So I got to see I Prevail, which was fantastic. So much power.
Right.
Wilson, who are, they're from Detroit anyway, so they're just friends and buds. That's where I hooked up with Tremonti. I had a great in-depth interview with Head. I don't know if you guys are Korn fans or not, but
right, yeah.
Okay. So that was really cool. And we were gone like the entire time. It was -40, so it worked out really great. Yeah.
Wow. So you obviously get to meet and greet a ton of people doing what you do. Is that something that you set up, or is that something your company sets up? How does that all go down?
Yeah, I decided there were a couple of different ways when I got into syndication how to do it. I decided to just own my own show.
Okay.
And then work in partnerships with other companies, with syndicators. So it really all comes down to me. I started setting things up originally. And once you've done it, once you kind of get in, the wheel sort of turns. Once you're inside the turning wheel, it has its own momentum.
Yeah.
And you get a reputation. Bands get to know, oh man, every time I interview that guy, he's good. He actually listens to the record. He knows what the hell's going on. And so they, I've had, I can or cannot, depending on what you guys want, say the name of the band, but there was a band in particular who told me, whenever I see my day sheet and I see your name on it or Pierre Robert, who's at WMMR, I know it's going to be a good day. It's like, you two are always prepared. You always, the interviews are fantastic with you guys. So wow. Made me feel good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah. What band was that?
Shinedown.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's very cool.
Do you pick all the music that you want to play on your radio station? And do you have bounds that you have to stay within from the company?
As far as syndication goes, when I'm doing the Chop Shop, which airs on, 25, 30 radio stations across the country, that's all me. I decide what I'm going to play. I decide when I'm going to play it, who I'm going to talk to. That's for those 2 hours. That's me. When I'm live on WRAF, like I was earlier today, that comes with the playlist. That's me presenting the songs in the order that they've pre-selected. And, I still determine what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it. But yeah, they pick the music. Now, because of my history and the number of years doing it, if there's something that doesn't make sense, they're okay with me changing it. But only because I have a track record of making changes that make sense.
Right.
So, with your, say you've got how many different like if you've got a 2-hour show, are you spending the whole week kind of preparing for that, listening to music and being like, I think I haven't played this in a while? What's your how do you go about doing that? And what's your timeline? Yeah,
I have a couple of benchmarks in the show. So we'll talk about the active rock version first.
Mm-hmm.
I have 2 interviews within the show. One is in the first hour and one's in the second hour. So I know I'm going to play a song from that band in the first hour to go with the interview.
Mm-hmm.
Then I do a segment called the Guitar List, where I name off random guitar players and get whoever guitarist I'm talking to react to, yes, I bought those albums. No, I never listened to that guy. Yeah, I listened to him, but he wasn't an influence, stuff like that. And then whichever reaction was the best, I play a song from that band. So it's
a little on the spot, kind of. It's not planned,
right? Unrehearsed reactions. That's how I refer to that segment.
Yeah. And then I have your whole mantra.
Yeah, right. I was just gonna say he's improv, man. That's great. Always has been.
I do a segment called The Founding Fathers, where it's basically a newer band covering an older band, but instead of just playing the song, I actually go back and play clips of the original song and talk about when the guitarist was born and how many bands they were in before this band and how many guitarists they influenced. And then after you've gotten about a 2-minute taste of the background of that band, then boom, here's the cover version.
Wow.
So cool way to do it.
Yeah. I do something called the All-Star Salute. Since I'm interviewing guitarists every single week and asking them about other guitarists, I then collect those. So like the one that aired this weekend was a bunch of different people talking about Zakk Wylde. So there's like 2 minutes of all these other guys telling you why they love Zakk Wylde. And then I play 2 songs from Zakk Wylde.
Right.
So once I program the benchmarks, then I go in and I fill in the rest of the show.
Wow.
I know I want a certain number of brand new songs because my passion is still breaking, oh my God, I found this band, you have to hear it. So I'll put those in. And then I go to the news and see, there was just, Kiss did this or somebody else did that. So I'll put in a Kiss song or I'll put in a whatever. And then, because those are obvious talking points since they're doing something news related. And then that's how I build the show.
Wow. That's really cool.
Yeah.
And I mean, is that you have a new show each week?
Yeah, every week.
Okay.
And I do an active rock version of the show and I do a classic rock version of the show. And then I also do a third show called Classic Rock Live, which I don't host. I program it and write it. And it's hosted by Pierre Robert at WMMR in Philadelphia.
Wow.
So that's my Monday through Friday. And then I'm live on the regular radio on Saturday and Sunday.
So do you tend to go towards the hard rock artists? Is that something that you are more interested in?
Yeah, what I like about the concept of the Chop Shop is that it's incredibly inclusive. And when you think of syndicated radio, almost every show is exclusive just by its own nature.
Right.
If you do, House of Hair, you can really only play bands from that era.
Right.
If you're doing, a all metal show, you pretty much have to stick to metal. But to do a show that's based and centered around guitar and people who use it, that's pretty much every band that's ever existed.
Right.
So it is super inclusive. I can play, a band like Hinder that doesn't have hardly any lead guitar whatsoever, or then I can jump into anything Tom Morello does, which is over the top and crazy.
Right.
And it all fits because just welcoming everybody to the family. But instead of asking questions specifically to the singer or the drummer, I try to ask the questions to the guitars. But I never get so over the, I've never asked anybody what gauge strings they use. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Right.
But for radio, they, I forget again which program director told me this, but it really stuck. It's called broadcasting for a reason. You're trying to reach a broad audience. And what I love about podcasting, and one of the reasons I do a podcast, is it is essentially narrowcasting. It is, you pick your niche, but instead of one city listening, it's the entire world.
Right.
So I like it. In a way, it's narrowcasting, and I just get huge enjoyment out of doing it.
Yeah. It's nice to geek out about the details of the things you care about that, non-musician might not want to know what kind of strings that guitarist used, but if you're podcasting, if you're trying to speak to people who are musicians who do care about that, we want to be the kind of place where we can talk about what gauge strings he used and how that allowed him to bend the notes like he did or whatever.
Absolutely.
Right. Create a certain feel or create a certain tone. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Have you touched on that topic of just how much tone is in the fingers, how much of it is flesh, and how little of it is the wood and the wire and the electronics and the amp? And
no, we get into all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where it originates from is the actual fingers and how you apply your specific technique to the fretboard. And that's how we get literally hundreds, if not thousands of different tones across the field over the many, many, many decades that we've had.
Yeah.
But then we've also had interviews with engineers, electrical engineers, and talking about how a lot of that tone, yes, comes out of the fingers specifically first, but then the whole signal chain definitely plays a key role into that as well, whether it's a certain kind of guitar, a certain kind of wood, a cabinet. All cabinets resonate differently, whether it's the circuitry and how you can change the circuitry and do different kind of resistors or capacitors. And yeah, we've gotten into all of that.
Awesome.
Yeah, we love that kind of stuff. I mean, that's how you get to really know a player. Like, you listen to somebody, you're like, how do they sound like that? And sometimes you really have to get into those nitty-gritty details.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But even still, like, I know as an engineer, it doesn't matter if I take Zakk Wylde's exact setup on stage and replicate it to a T, it's not going to come out the same because he had a specific technique on his fingers. And it's the same thing with engineering. I could look at, Chris Lord-Alge or Chad Blake or any of these, really big guys who've done some amazing albums, and I can get all of their settings on their board, how much compression he used here, and he, used this frequency here and whatnot like that. And I can get exactly the same sound, but it's not gonna be the same because he does it a specific way. And it's all in his fingers and how he hears through his ears. And it's not gonna be the same for me. So it's very unique to all of us.
Ted Nugent gave me a fantastic example. So I'll share the story because if this helps strip it down to basics. I worked with Ted for about 2 years, by the way, but
how was that?
Well, exhilarating and difficult.
Yeah, right. That sigh said it enough.
Yes, the pause said a lot. Yes.
Yeah.
He said he had the opportunity to go to Eddie Van Halen's house and pick up Eddie's guitar, turned up through Eddie's rig, and he played Stranglehold, and it sounded exactly like Stranglehold.
Yeah.
And it's, and there is some truth to, well, not just some truth. The majority of your sound just comes from you. It comes from your vibe. And where I find a lot of the little technical stuff makes a difference is it makes a difference in how you play. If you pick up a Stratocaster, or let's say you play a Stratocaster almost all the time, right? And then you pick up a 335, well, you're just going to play different. It's still you. You're still a human, but you're going to play different. You're holding something you're not familiar with.
Right.
If you play it through a different foot pedal or play it through a different EQ or play with a delay, it changes the sound, but what it really changes is the approach of the musician. That's where you get the different sounds from, is it changes the human.
Yeah.
That's an incredibly good point. I mean, if you've got a 335, like that's what I play, the woody tone of it, like you want to hear that, and you play a note, and because it sounds a certain way, you might hold it out because it sounds so good. I think if you have a certain level of sustain, you play differently, whether that's from your overdrive pedal or your compressor, whatever. It really causes you to change, in real time. You're making different decisions because of what you're hearing.
Yep, totally agree.
Yeah.
And I think it's a point that gets, I think some people know it, but haven't taken the time to really think about it. Like they know it because they've experienced it, but they don't take the time to sit and think about the science behind it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Different picks make a big difference too. I mean, if you got a thin pick, I can't play like certain licks that I would play or ways of moving around the fretboard. It gets sloppy because the pick flexes and you've got a little delay there, and you don't have the attack, which causes the tubes to not break up the same way. That makes a big difference too.
I just saw a band for the 5th time. They were actually on the ship that I was on, called Raven Eye. If you ever get a chance to see Raven Eye, they're so much fun. But they're a 3-piece, but the guitarist plays with a thumb pick like a banjo guy.
Oh,
and he said he mostly does it just because he got tired of dropping his pick, because he runs and jumps and he's all over the place. But it changes the way he attacks his guitar.
Oh yeah,
and it's neat. It's just something you don't see all the time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Look at Mark Knopfler or Lindsey Buckingham. Their style obviously is finger picking, but their tone that they get out of their guitar is so different than anybody else. I mean, that's very unique to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Wow. So, okay. So 1,500 interviews. I mean, that's beyond impressive. What is it that you, I guess, would connect with on the most? Like, you obviously spend a lot of time listening to albums and digging into the feel of what's going on behind the artist. After all this time spending with thousands of albums, what connects with you the most?
I didn't know it as a kid, but I listened through producers' ears. And later when I interviewed Bob Ezra, and he used a term that I use all the time now. He said, you didn't know it at the time, but you had the ability to hear colors other people can't see.
Right.
And I was, even when I tried to be in a band originally, you speak the same language, but you use different terms because you think about it different. Musicians often think in terms of the note and the flat or the sharp, whereas I wouldn't hear flat or sharp. I would hear dull or
almost like a synesthesia almost.
Yeah, like I would hear in colors and textures.
Yeah.
And so I would have trouble communicating with them because they would, all right, do this and this and this and, do it in this measure and that measure. And sure, eventually I learned all that stuff, but I just didn't hear that way as a kid. I heard more from an engineering and production standpoint. It's just the way my mind operated. And once I learned to speak their language, it got a hell of a lot better, of course.
Right.
But that's been my favorite. And some of my absolute favorite interviews over my career have been with other producers because I feel like I speak their language,
Right.
When you interviewed Bob Ezra, isn't he produced Pink Floyd, right?
Yeah. Pink Floyd, The Wall is the biggest album with his name on it, but all the early Alice Cooper stuff. And that was the stuff that changed my life, was the early Alice Cooper stuff. And, Peter Gabriel and Aerosmith. And it just, Bob's had a legendary career.
Yeah.
I saw part of your interview with Bob Ezra, and you were talking about, I think it was Comfortably Numb. He had put that orchestra in the background, and David Gilmour didn't like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you're talking about the same kind of stuff, that hearing the greater picture from you're not thinking about each note, you're thinking about the tones and textures and musical colors.
Yeah. So, and then just as I went through my life, I did start as an audio engineer, and then I did end up in a band, and I have written songs, and then I ended up on the radio, and I've played songs, and I've seen how management interacts, and I understand how the PR stuff works. And now at this point, there isn't much that can come out that I haven't understood an angle on. And Paul O'Neill, who was one of my heroes, he was producer as well for Trans Siberian Orchestra. He said it's a lot like when a soldier becomes a reporter and then he interviews another soldier. They're more willing to open up to him because he knows that he's experienced that. I'm kind of getting to that now with a lot of bands on my second, third, fifth interviews with them. It's like, oh, okay, we know we can open up to this guy because he's been there.
Right. Okay, so that I guess that kind of brings up a little bit of a question for me, since you're talking about having 4 or 5 interviews over the years and getting into it. And that brings up the question for me of the music industry and how it has changed over the years, and what it's looking like now versus what it looked like 10, 20 years ago, and even where you possibly might think it might be going in the future.
Well, the strangest part is everybody sees the advances because they're technological, but in many ways, if you were old enough to remember it, and if you're not, you can talk to your parents or grandparents. We have evolved now to a place where singles are the most important and concerts are the most important, which is exactly where we were in the late 50s and early 60s.
Yeah.
There were no full albums. Everything was 45s. And you would put out a 45 to get people to go to your concerts. That's where all the money was. It eventually changed with the invention of abilities to play longer sets of music, whether it be vinyl or tapes.
Right.
And then people started getting into albums, and everything changed. So in a way, we just returned, the cycle is just kind of returned back to what it was. So there is a template of how to be somewhat successful there, because it's what artists did in the late 60s or in the early 60s.
Right.
Where it's changed now is back then people would still actually purchase music. Now we're getting to a place where people will pretty much just subscribe and not own anything. Will that change? I don't know. It's, I hear people say all the time that, well, now that music's free, nobody's ever going to pay for it. But that's not necessarily true. Water was free my whole life, and now we pay for it all the time.
Right.
So, how did that happen? Why didn't we just go, no, water's free, I'm not paying for that?
Right. Yeah.
Because it used to be. Right. So we might get back to a place. Something I suggested probably wouldn't go over too well, but I think about you know, an album from one of my favorite bands, I may have bought 5 or 6 different times because I had it on vinyl and I wore it out, and then I had to have it on cassette, and then I had to have it on CD. And it would be nice to just buy a license to that song or that band, and then you just have it for life. If they change formats again, you still have it.
Right. That makes sense.
That might get somebody to spend money now that they haven't spent before, but I don't know. I mean, we're in a whole new frontier. And again, to bring it back to podcasting, it's what I like about podcasting. Nobody knows where this is going. This is a whole new frontier.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, the old model was, you know, you listen to a band of your choice, be it Pink Floyd or whoever it was, and you would wait a year, 2 years for them to come out with an album. And now, like you said, it's come to the singles again. And with the internet being so ready with, you know, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter and whatnot like that, you always have your eye on that band. And it seems as though it is geared towards this idea of singles and having your crowd, your respective fan base, kind of follow along with that process. And the more that you bring them into that process, the more that they're likely to follow along and purchase anything that you have, or even, you know, go the route of like Patreon and donate and give you money just because they love you.
Right.
So it is definitely a changing kind of thing that's happening within the past, even 10, 15 years is it does seem to be going down to the single based thing where, you know, every month or every 2 months, you're releasing something.
There's a lot of good still out there in the music industry. Probably the biggest concern for me is, and I've used this test on a number of different people, whether it be friends or people I've interviewed. You know, do you remember the first album you bought? And across the board, everybody does. And do you remember the first CD you bought? And across the board, everybody does. And then I say, what was the first song you downloaded? And they have no idea because you didn't physically hold it in your hand.
Right.
There was no physical, you bought air essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, and so you can't remember.
No, it's a great point.
And, you know, as much as I love music and remember all of my first, I don't have any clue what the first download was. I don't know.
No.
I think with Napster, you were able to just download so much stuff. It was like, you know, just download 1,000 songs,
right?
Which would take, you know,
yeah. When Napster happened,
1,000 minutes maybe, but
yeah, Napster happened and LimeWire happened. It was like, oh man, good night.
Yeah, and now this is interesting as well. The #1 source in the world for music for the first time, I think it was last year that it was the first time it happened, isn't a musical platform at all. It's YouTube.
Yeah.
It's a video platform. But the #1 place to access music across the globe is now YouTube. That's weird to me.
It's nice that you can go to YouTube and type in the name of a song, who it's by, and, you know, maybe it's somebody's stupid video with like lyrics and their own personal pictures they put up there, but at least you can hear the song, and half the time that's all you need. Like, at least for me as a teacher, like I'm always, kid wants to play something and I'm like, okay, I don't know what this is, and it's not on my subscription app, and I just look it up.
But I think because we have access to everything and because we're not paying for it, you also now run into a place where people will go, wow, I haven't heard this song in a while. They'll type it in and they'll only listen to 35 or 40 seconds of it, and then they move on to something else. But they're not invested in it. They didn't pay for it. Right. So they just listen for a few seconds and they move on. Yeah. So there's a bit of devaluation there. But, you know, it's not all doom and gloom, but that part does exist.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly remember sitting on the floor with the album cover spread out, listening to the entire album, just staring at the liner notes. And, you know, I don't think that doesn't happen as much anymore.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I used to put when I got a CD, I'd put it in the car and it would stay in there for like a month. Like I'd listen on repeat just because it took so much more effort to switch out the CD and the CD player. You know?
Yeah.
But now, with your iPhone, you can just switch. You know, it's rare that I listen to a whole album now.
Yeah.
Which is sad.
Yeah. And speaking of like YouTube, I mean, you can go out and find tons and tons and tons of music that is, you know, it's wonderful to be able to have access to all of that. But it is also interesting to me that in today's world where you have millions of people using Google and YouTube as the number 1 and 2 search across the world, that you have artists like, until recently, Taylor Swift, but things like, let's see, Fleetwood Mac or Led Zeppelin or things like that, who don't allow their music on YouTube. I think that's kind of interesting. And there's actually a lot of jazz artists, and we've talked about this in the past as well, with like Pat Metheny and one like that, where they won't allow any of their live material to be published on YouTube. I think that's kind of interesting, that they're pulling all of that away from the public eye, where I kind of have this feeling that if they were to do that, it would give them more exposure. They kind of have this kind of old time feel of back in the day, where, you know, again, before Napster and LimeWire and all that, where, you know, no, I want my money because I worked hard on this, and I you know, it's mine.
Yeah. Well, there comes a point where, you know, you don't need any more publicity. There comes a time when you're just big enough that you don't need it anymore.
Right.
And I actually, you know, I'm not in that place. I'll never be in that place. But I think if I was, you know, if I was Led Zeppelin, I would restrict what could and couldn't, you know, and not just because I want people to buy it and I want more money. It's not about the greed. It's about having a little bit of mystery. It's about making people crave what you're doing, you know, because that was a big part of my passion for a lot of the bands that I really got into, was that it wasn't always accessible. You had to work for it.
Yeah. Well, I think where my thought process that comes from is because I teach for a living, and I have a lot of younger students who come in and they don't know who Led Zeppelin or Pink Floyd or you know, Aerosmith or any of these guys are. And now obviously it's up to us as teachers to be able to expose them to that. But if I hadn't, that would have never happened, because mom and dad, for whatever reason, aren't exposing them to that kind of music. And most often they're listening to pop music on the radio that's in the car or whatnot like that, and they may not get the chance to listen to Fleetwood Mac.
Shame on those parents.
Oh yeah, I know.
You know, every district is different, every school is different, every state is different, obviously. My wife is a high school teacher. Gina teaches all seniors, and I'm moved by the number of kids that are aware of the history. And it's pretty cool. I mean, they might be every bit as into, you know, a Greta Van Fleet or a Hailstorm, which is great because that's more their generation, but they also know who the Doors are. And I'm like, all right, this is cool.
Yeah. I mean, as a music teacher, I think it's extremely important that you know where the roots are, and then you get the history, and you understand where all of the bands today get their influences from, and see, you know, oh, you really like this band? Well, check it out. These guys kind of pulled from this band and this kind of genre, that was going on. So it's very, very important to kind of educate everybody in terms of where it all came from.
My students, like, I feel like 2 out of 3, maybe 1 out of every 2 comes in, and I like, one of the first questions I ask them is, well, I probably first ask them what their favorite food is, just to try to break the ice. But then I'll ask them what their favorite band or favorite song is, and like, it's unbelievable how many of them say Imagine Dragons. I'm just like, have you heard anything else? Like, I mean, it's great because you can teach them.
At that point, you go, okay, I want to teach you what rock and roll is, because you don't know.
Yeah, they don't.
You clearly don't know. You don't understand the concept. Let's start over.
Right. Here's a power chord. Let's start playing some Smoke on the Water.
Fortunately, you can get them playing Imagine Dragons in several lessons.
Right.
3 chords repeated the entire time.
And that's great. Whatever the introduction to music is, you know, really. I will make fun of certain bands my whole life, and I will enjoy doing it. But at the end of the day, I have sort of a mantra that I state probably far too often, but I really love it. And I tell people all the time, listen, I love Primus, but I don't want to live in a world where everybody loves Primus.
Right.
That's not what music's for. You're supposed to have your own thing. It's not supposed to be for everyone. There's another band out there for you, you know? So
come on, I want a world of Primus.
that's a twisted world right there.
Oh, come on, let's play both the best. Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Band that I'm really looking forward to coming out with another album is Tool. I know they're getting ready to come out with a new album, and that's gonna be pretty amazing.
Haven't they been working on that for like a decade?
13 years.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know that they were working on it the whole time.
Right. No.
I think they were working on not working on it mostly.
Right. I think that they were taking hiatus. But yeah, that's gonna be a good one coming out.
That was actually the very first platinum album I ever got in my career was Undertow.
Really?
Yep. I don't know how they measure it or how they figured it out, but somebody at the label said I was the first person on commercial radio to play Tool. College stations had been playing them, but I was one of the first on a major station, and so that was my first platinum album was Tool. Pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So can you? This is gonna sound like I don't know what I'm talking about because I don't. But what do you mean it's your first platinum album? Because you played them, you get credit for being there at the beginning? I don't quite understand.
When the RIAA puts together a plaque with an album on it, certain people get their names on the plaque. Like obviously the band members get their own with their name on it, and the record label and managers, and then anybody else who might have been influential in a particular way. Maybe a promoter who put them out on concert and made them millions of dollars, or it doesn't go down all the way to like the caterer or anything, but people that they decide were influential along the way will often get their own plaque. Although there's far less of them these days, and not just because there aren't as many sales, but just I think the record companies restricted the budget, so they just don't send out as many as they used to. But yeah, if they thought you were real influential in helping to break a band or to break a particular album, or played a role, then you'd get the plaque with your name on it.
Okay, that totally makes sense. So they actually sent you a plaque saying you, by putting that Tool on mainstream radio, you helped them achieve this.
Yeah. Now, most of the time at a radio station, the plaque will come in with just the radio station name on it. Now I got a note saying, because that one was sent to our radio station, but the note was, hey, this is because you were the first one to play them, and so on and so forth. But I do have several with my names on them, which are hanging behind me. You guys can't see them, but yeah, there are several that actually have my name on them. So
which ones?
A lot of them are Trans Siberian Orchestra. That was the band that I've had the longest and most unique relationship with. Their creator, Paul O'Neill, I met back from the Sabotage days when I was first getting into radio,
right?
And we cemented a friendship early on. And I was never paid, which is fine, and I'm not looking to be, but I was essentially a consultant for the band for a while. They used to have me come to New York and sit in the studio, in the giant multi-track studio, and listen to the album as it was in process and tell them what I thought radio might play and what they wouldn't play, and so to sort of guide them in the recording process.
Wow.
But, yeah. So I've been in pretty deep with that band for a long time.
I was going to say, I imagine having all these interviews over and over again with some of these bands, you've created quite the friendship with some of these people.
Yeah. I mean, most of them, it's just on sort of a, I'll text you when I get to town basis, or maybe you trade an email here or there.
Yeah.
Aren't a ton of bands that it's just a hang,
Right.
But yeah, I mean, if I needed to email Steve Vai right now, he would email me back. So, it's
That's cool.
Unless I'm being annoying.
Yeah.
Do you ever, so you've played in bands. How much do you play now? And I guess my follow-up question would be, do you ever ask, I don't know, for advice from somebody like Steve Vai, or you're just in contact with so many players. I didn't know if you ever get to learn anything that helps you become a better player.
Well, maybe this is where you guys will come in as teachers. All right, we're going to go down a strange path. I did a solo album in 1999, I believe. And as it was coming out, it was the same time my first wife was diagnosed with cancer.
Okay.
I never really got a chance to go out and play that at all. And I never really got a chance to do anything beyond it. Everything became about fighting cancer.
Yeah,
and 6 years later, when she passed away, I've never found the energy or really even the desire to make music again. So it's been, well, she passed away in 2006. So do I pick up a guitar now and then? Sure. Do I play a few notes on a piano? Sure. But I have no desire to write another song. It left. When she died, it left with her.
Yeah.
I don't know why. So I really don't ask for advice. I mean, every now and then, one of my friends will talk me into coming out on stage at a local gig and singing a song or two, and I do it, and I enjoy it. But then when the moment's over, it's just done.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I've made a mistake by moving away from the playing and creating of the music. I think I just found my happiness in going back to what I was as a kid and just listening. I think I just felt maybe I felt more comfortable in that space. You know, when I was in the creation of music, I was also in the creation or in the just surviving for life. And some part of me doesn't want to go back there.
Yeah.
So a little darker than you wanted to go, but there you have it.
Well, like you had said earlier, it's the truth, and honesty is what it's really all about. And obviously our condolences to you. And it's, that's never obviously an easy thing to go. And especially if it had a connection with her in any way whatsoever, I could understand that. And maybe someday in the future you would get that fire, but it's not now. And you feel really good doing the interviews and sticking with that. And it makes you feel good. And going out on stage once in a while and sing with a couple buddies, that's cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think you have to feed it. For me, staying motivated to pursue learning new things on the guitar, instruments in general, it's all about feeding the passion, feeding the fire. And it's interesting because for me, a lot of that comes from listening to music. I hear something, I'm like, oh my God, I want to play that. How do I play that? And I'll like listen to it over and over, and I'll look up, try to find lessons on how to do that kind of thing or whatever it is. It's interesting that, for you, hearing so much good music wouldn't make you want to do that, but wouldn't inspire you to want to try to dive in a little deeper.
Yeah, it makes me want to get back in the studio with bands because that was my original love, was being in the studio and watching how it's, created from the artistic side. And even when I was in a band, I never enjoyed playing live shows. It was never, I was the mad scientist. Get me back in the studio. That's where I belong.
Right.
I was always worried about the next note and, oh my God, what if I don't hit it? And what if this happens? And what if I come in late? And instead of enjoying what was going on and transpiring and connecting with people, I was so worried all the time that I never had any fun.
Right.
Which was a lesson I have now learned many times over, is just if you go out and have fun, other people will have fun. But I missed that in the early stages.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, I connect with that a lot. There's something about being in the studio that I really enjoy, that whole process of, the whole band coming together and creating something from nothing, and the excitement from it, let them do their thing. I'm going to be the guy behind the board and create. And I love that. There's some kind of energy there that I just love.
Yeah.
The permanence of recording something, and the fact that you can, it doesn't matter if you mess up a take, like it is relaxing in a lot of ways. Once you get over that, we've talked about it before, if you've never been in the studio, it can be nerve-wracking, especially when you've got a tight budget and you're working against time. But when you are comfortable in the studio, it is a very relaxing atmosphere to know that I can just try something, and I can hear how it sounds. If it's no good, let's try something else.
And
for a different guitar off the wall. Let's try a different amp, a different setup, everything.
For a lot of musicians, the biggest thing to learn is how to listen. Things sound differently when you're in a studio. A lot of things are isolated. The mixes are different than what you're used to. You're hearing a raw direct sound from an amp as opposed to an amp mixed with two other guitar players and a keyboard and a drum. And that, until you get used to it, it's just a very alien place to be. And it's hard to just relax and be yourself when you're learning to listen in a whole different way. But once you've learned that, oh man, it's so great.
So when you were talking about going out to New York and listening to TSO and kind of getting an idea of what they would play on radio, what exactly are you looking for? What are you listening for in terms of playability on the radio?
Well, first of all, that was probably 18 years ago or so. That was in the early days. So
Yeah.
It's changed.
I'm just thinking about in terms of any of our listeners who are looking that route towards radio and trying to release towards a radio. I know it's hard for, especially now. Well, I don't know. How hard is it to get from, in terms of where it was yesteryear to now in terms of getting your music out on radio?
It's harder now.
Yeah.
It's harder now because there's so many outlets that radio is kind of constricted a little bit.
Okay.
Because there's a million other places that your music can go. So it is harder now. The trick is there's a place in here somewhere, and it's a narrow place. You want to sound different enough that you stand out,
right?
But not so different that it scares program directors from wanting to put you on in the first place.
Yeah, that's a small space.
Yeah,
it is. So, that is the sweet spot. Yeah. If you sound different than everybody else, then it's going to catch our ear immediately. Like, wow, hey, that's different. But if it's so different and it's so out there, then where can I place it? How can I place it next to these other bands, and how is it going to work? So that's sort of the question that has to be answered. But here's the best part. If you're great at what you do, it'll find its way. Tool didn't sound like anything else, but it was so good you couldn't deny it.
In your opinion, because I was just having a discussion the other day with a colleague of mine, do you think A&R guys are willing to take a chance as much as they used to? Because there's no budget for it. Right.
In many cases, there aren't an A&R guy.
Right. The money is completely different now.
Yeah.
It used to be over $100,000 for an album, and now you're lucky if you get $10,000.
Well, they also used to just invest in a band, and they didn't care if you didn't hit on the first or second album because they were working towards your third and fourth.
That's exactly right.
They were building towards that. It's not that way anymore. Now it's more, and this isn't true of every record label, but now it's more, let's sign 15 bands, and if one of them hits, we'll keep them and cut the other 14. As opposed to signing 2 and developing those 2.
Right.
It's a different concept.
Yeah, it really is. The discussion that we were having is that, in terms of the variety of music that used to be on the radio, whether it was Steely Dan or Gloria Estefan or Cyndi Lauper or whoever it was, you had a very wide variety of music that was on the radio. And now I don't see that as much in terms of radio. I don't see that happening as much.
Yeah. We actually did. I'm going to hold this up for a second. My podcast is called The Sound Of, which I do with Ann Carlini. And between Ann and I, we've been on the radio for 63 years.
Awesome.
So, we're both there isn't a band we haven't seen, interviewed, interacted with, played on the radio, something.
Yeah.
But one of our fantastic discussions was what makes a band timeless, and would a band from a different era work today, or would a band from today work in a different era?
Okay.
And we talked about, like, as great as Pink Floyd is, if there had never been a Pink Floyd and they came out today, probably too adventurous, doesn't sound like any other bands, probably scares most of the corporate program directors, and probably doesn't get played.
Right.
Probably.
That's sad.
Yeah.
It is. But
so how many other Pink Floyds are out there right now that aren't being...
It was a different time and a different era. But then you do occasionally, there's a band called Nothing More. I don't know if you guys are super familiar with them or not, but they're on the newer side, and they sound nothing like anything that's out there. They embrace intelligence and technology, but presented in, I don't know. It's almost like a Queensryche Operation Mindcrime level production, but blended with everything that's new and modern and hasn't been done before. I mean, and it's so good. I was just getting to a point where I've seen 700 concerts or whatever. You feel like you've seen everything, and I see these guys, and I'm like, oh my God, I haven't seen everything. This is amazing. Wow. Yet radio's playing them, and they've even had a couple of #1 songs at radio. So you can be totally different and still hit. Al Petrelli used this definition, and I love it. When people talk about luck or timing or any of that stuff, luck is when opportunity meets preparation. That's his definition. And I can't think of anything more poignant, because we almost all have opportunities, but sometimes we're not totally prepared when that opportunity comes.
Right.
Other people are totally prepared, but the wrong opportunity comes. It's not the right one. But when they say, wow, that band hit and they were lucky. Well, that band's been playing little dirt bars for 12 years. They were prepared. When the opportunity came, they were prepared. That's what luck is.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you have to be willing to take the opportunity. It may not be the most opportune time in your life, but you have to be able to say, I have to do this.
Yeah. Far better, to take your shot and fail.
Absolutely.
And never take your shot. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And let's say you're not 100% prepared, but you take that opportunity. It's most likely going to lead you to another opportunity somewhere else. And maybe you will be prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty, to me, it's pretty amazing how the music industry has changed so much over even the past 20 years. It's pretty amazing in terms of where it goes. I do maintain that video killed the radio star. Whenever MTV came into play, it was something, not that it was a bad thing, and not that streaming or the internet or anything like that is a bad thing. It's just changed. It's different. The days of, like I said, sitting on your floor and going through an entire album and getting up to flip the album over and and going that whole process of getting into the album, and that's long gone. And maybe it may come around again. Maybe it is reciprocal. I have no idea.
I agree with your assessment, but I think of a different type of video. I think it's video games that killed the radio star, although I don't think it's dead.
Wow.
But I'll use this example of, let's say only 10% of the people in the world are super creative. And then of that 10%, how many of them are also motivated? So you keep getting into these lesser percentages, right? Mm. Well, in the old days, the largest of that percentage would get into music. And that's how you ended up with your Led Zeppelins, your Rolling Stones, your Beatles, whatever.
Right.
The Led Zeppelins of today just made that new Avengers movie, right? They just made Red Dead Redemption. Yeah. They're still the most creative people on earth, but instead of being inspired to go into music, they went into video games because it was this emerging thing. That's why video games went from little Pong, little beeps and boops to you feel like you're watching a film.
Oh my gosh. Video games are huge nowadays.
It's enormous, but there's still the same number of creative people in the world, but there's more options as to where to place that creativity.
Yeah.
And most of those creative people went to those emerging places, whereas rock wasn't emerging anymore. There's still plenty of musicians out there, but it's not the first choice for the super creatives. Yeah. At least that's my thought.
Yeah. And I like the late 80s. The late 80s for me was very much about the guitar rock god. It was very much about hair metal and all these huge guitar, like it was just Joe Satriani and Steve Vai, and it was like the guitar was highlighted at the late 80s, and then grunge came along and that changed everything. But it's kind of interesting to see where over the decades, in terms of how guitar has been highlighted, it's kind of neat to watch that happen.
Yeah, and I feel like we're going through that cycle again right now. After Nirvana, Soundgarden, Stone Temple Pilots, bands sort of copied that mode copy's a little strong. They were influenced by that.
Right.
They wanted to be that. They wanted to have that sound and make their own version of it. But and a lot of this falls on the producers and the record labels, over compressed and over, fit everything into a box to sell everything. And we're now at a point where we're breaking out of that again.
Yeah.
If you hear a lot of these new bands, the Greta Van Fleet album that just came out is so wide open. It's not overly compressed. Everything breathes. It sounds like it was recorded on 2-track tape, or 2-inch tape.
Yeah.
It's amazing the air and the breath that is in that. And now there's a whole bunch of bands that are influenced by the late 60s, early 70s coming out. Bands like Rival Sons and Dorothy and Joyous Wolf, Raven Eye. So we're kind of getting back to that raw energy, that honest energy, instead of, hey, how can I do what Seether did? It's, hey, how can I just make my own statement?
Right. And thank goodness that the sound wars are finally coming to an end. I'm so glad that it's finally being just rid of. It's just amazing how long that lasted, and everybody's just like, I want it louder, I want it louder, I want it louder, and it's ruined music. The whole dynamics have just suffered for the past 20 years. And thank goodness, SoundCloud and iTunes and all of these guys streaming sites have finally jumped on board and said, okay, we're going to set a standard. And there is no actual standard yet, but it's around 14 LUFS. And finally people are saying, okay, well, pushing, I guess I should say more along the lines of producers and engineers are saying, the more that you push that sound, the louder you try to get, you're going to suffer. And you're not going to be able to hear all the dynamics that are within your album. So it's nice to be able to hear a lot of that starting. It's just now starting to come back. Which is nice.
And the key is you can feel the difference. There are people out there who may not be able to hear the difference, but you can feel it.
Yeah. I noticed, from beforehand when we were talking, you had mentioned that you have a book.
Yeah, it's about 5 years old.
Okay.
It was interesting. It kind of goes back to my first wife again, Sabrina, who was also on the radio, by the way. She was on the radio in Detroit, a little bit rock, but mostly she was a sportscaster. And so during her struggle with cancer, she kind of kept a diary. And one of the last things she asked me to do was, could I publish some of her diary for people who were struggling, with cancer?
Well, that's wonderful.
And so I spent a few years trying to write this story, and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't capture her. Right. I couldn't make it work. And a doctor suggested, why don't you write your story? Because you've had an interesting life. And when you get to the parts about her, use her words in her diary. And so it essentially became an autobiography, and I've got it nearby.
From Black to Light. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. For all the people listening and not watching, From Black to Light by Steve Vai.
That's me. And so it's this kind of fascinating tale. A friend of mine, actually, after it came out, said, it's 3 love stories in one. It's your love for music, your love for your first wife, Sabrina, and your love for your second wife, Gina, who kind of healed you after losing Sabrina.
Yeah.
So it's just all this real human element stuff, but it all takes place, while I'm interviewing Alex Lifeson from Rush, and while I'm getting business advice from Peter Frampton, and while it's so strange because it's 2 worlds, in the way it comes together. There's a moment in the book where Slash invites me to Duff's birthday party, and it's like, I got to take care of my wife. Like as soon as I get off the air, and I explained that she was sick, and he took care of everything. Had his manager take care of it, so I was able to bring my very sick wife at the time to this birthday party, and Slash just took great care of us. And it's like,
wow.
Yeah. So it became a kind of a really fascinating way to tell the story. And then once I followed that advice, it turned out great. It's still to this day, it's like 5 years old, and it's still 5 stars on Amazon. So
awesome. That's so
Yeah.
good.
Hey, congrats on that.
Yeah.
It's got to feel good to have that out there.
Yep. Now, if I can just write the next book.
Oh, it'll happen, I'm sure.
Yeah. In process. It's in process.
It's not like you don't have the material, man. That's great.
So what?
Oh, go ahead,
I
Joe.
wanted to see. I mean, a birthday party with Slash and Duff. Was that like when they were still as rowdy as they originally were? Were they
It was on
relaxed at that point?
Yeah, it was on the Velvet Revolver tour.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just out on tour. They happened to be in Detroit on Duff's birthday. And so, hey, we're going to have a cake for Duff tonight. We're going to gather, everybody together, and it's going to be after the show, and we want you to come. And like I said, I just kind of explained, well, I've got to get home. I got to take care of Sabrina. And they were like, no, you don't. We got it covered. You bring her. We'll take care of the rest. Like, oh, okay.
Wow.
I just know they were from everything I've read, they were pretty wild early on.
Yeah.
They're partying.
Yeah. There's been there's a time or two that you run into things like that. This was fairly recently, just a couple of years ago. There was a post-show hang. Everybody was done working, whether it was the bands or interviews or whatever. It was all done, and somebody was starting to break out the cocaine, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna slip up, guys.
Yeah, right.
Time for me to leave. You guys enjoy your night.
Yep, not for me.
Yep, got places to go.
Yep, that's exactly
So.
right. Well, it sounds like you've had quite the journey, Steve. It's pretty amazing. I'm quite impressed. It's awesome. You've obviously gotten some great opportunities and actually, taken the bull by the horns and done a really good thing. It's pretty awesome.
Well, thank you. That's what it's always been about. Was the experience for me. I'm not a rich guy. I'll never be, and I don't care because I didn't do it for the money. Just followed my dream. Wanted to be a part of the music that inspired me. Try to give back when I can.
You don't need to be rich when you're surrounded by the things that you love, and those things don't require lots of money.
Yep.
Yeah, they fuel the fire and fuel their passion. That's the most important. I mean, when you do move on to the next level, it's all about what you've done and that you're happy with what you've left. It's awesome.
When we get together Wednesday, we're recording our next podcast. I'll be sure and tell our listeners to tune by to Fret Buzz to check out the latest.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. We do appreciate it. This has been wonderful. This really has. I loved hearing the stories, and I'm glad we made a connection.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we'll stay in touch and continue the friendship.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I hope you have a great Sunday and enjoy yourself.
Thanks, guys.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
Bye.
Yeah.